Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny and I am joining you today from my childhood home, my parents' home in Montreal in Canada. I am really excited to be home for the holidays visiting. We don't have a lot of snow, but we've got a covering, and just enough of a covering that Mom and I discovered birds had been running just all over her gardens, all over the yard. She leaves her seed heads on the plants over the winter often, and birds had clearly just been having so much fun with that this morning before we even woke up. So that was a really fun kind of reminder of how, you know, snow can show you the evidence of the wildlife that's around you, even if you don't see the wildlife itself. I think we woke up too late to see the birds actually having a good time. So really pleased to be home. I've been knitting away and I have I only actually have 4 of them with me, but 5 little knitting gifts to chat with you about today, and I'm really excited about them. So let's jump right in. So the first of the gift knits has already been gifted. I don't have it with me anymore, but I did talk about it briefly last time, so this won't be completely out of the blue. And this was a Simple Thing shawl that I knit for a family member of my husband's, someone that we both love a lot, who's had some tricky health diagnoses lately. And I really wanted to make this out of something really soft for her. So did a bit of searching around. I tend to like hardy, kind of rugged, rugged rustic wools with lots of body, but I knit that up for her in Rowan Moordale. I don't know why, but I always want to call it Moorland, so I had to double check myself. Rowan Moordale in a kind of gray blue color called Pepper. That's color 002. And it was really pleasant to knit with. It did. And I think this is probably a characteristic of lots of softer fibers. I don't know, maybe you can tell me, but it did seem to pill a little bit as I was knitting with it. I pulled back at one point and it seemed, you know, some fibers came off in a kind of pilling way, and that made me quite nervous. I was worried that, you know, the object itself might pill. But once I got going with it, I found that didn't happen again. And then the final, you know, I rubbed it a little bit just to see. I didn't want to gift something that would pill right away. And it seemed to hold up really well. So I wonder if that was just a bit of a fluke, or it just, you know, the way that I pulled it back it didn't like, but it seems to have held up really well, and it's been really well received on the other end. I've gotten lots of pictures of this family member wearing the scarf, which is, you know, that's what we want as knitters. That's you know, that's all we ask for, really. Or that's, you know, that's all I can ask for. I think that someone is wearing it, and if I get pictures, that's a bonus. The Moordale is a 70% wool, 30% alpaca, so I think it's going to be quite nice and warm. And it sounds like this family member is in London, and it sounds like they're having a pretty damp December that's quite chilly. So I'm glad that that's getting a lot of use and keeping that family member warm. This was a project that I had knit before, not a project that I knit before, a pattern that I had knit before. Easy, quick, a really nice gift knit. So it was a real pleasure to get that sent off. The second work in progress is one that I'm really excited about. This is one that this is probably the project for the holidays that I had been planning the longest. I've knit quite a few little things for the holidays. I've talked a little bit last time about how I'm realizing that isn't maybe my favorite type of knitting, the kind of small project knitting. But this one I had been planning for quite a while, and I am so pleased with how it turned out. I'll give you a close look before I chat about it. So this is a somewhat self-drafted hat, but the pattern, the motif is not mine. So this is a hat with frogs on it, as hopefully you can tell that they're frogs, for my mum. And this is knit out of the leftover Plodulopi that she bought in sweaters quantities for herself and for me when she visited Iceland in person several years ago now, well before the pandemic. And I knit her the Story Stormer sweater in the kind of spring through late summer, and I had just enough left to make us both hats. So I made the sheep hat for myself a couple of weeks ago, and that was kind of a bit of a trial for this one. So lots of the things that I wasn't so happy about with the sheep hat, I'm really very happy about having updated them in this pattern. So for one thing, I cast on fewer stitches. I think for the sheep hat, I cast on 106 stitches for the brim, and I cast on 100 for this brim. I think it fits much better. I'm really happy with it. It is funny, the motif and the kind of main part of the hat has the same number of stitches as the sheep hat, but this was a real reminder for me of how the psychology of knitting gets into our fingers, or our psychology while we're knitting gets into our fingers even if we don't mean for it to. I think just overall I found the sheep hat a bit large, and so without meaning to change my tension, this hat has ended up a bit more snug in the top as well. I use the same needles, it's the same yarn, you know. When I knitted in the sweaters, it didn't have a different gauge, so you know, I think having a different gauge here is really just, I was worried that the hat was going to be too big, and so I clearly tightened up a little bit. Even though I'm usually a tight knitter to begin with, so I must have tightened up even more, but that's worked out fine. I'm actually really happy with the size of this hat. I think it's going to fit much better, and it's just turned out really cute. So the motif, which is probably the most exciting bit of this hat, this one is not my own. This comes from, and let me just double check that. So this comes from Jorid Lindvik's frog mittens, and I took the motif, the mittens have these kind of lovely frogs dancing on the front side of the mitten, but I took the motif from the palm. And I'd love to make these mittens for Mum at some point. My mum really loves frogs. It's a real, you know, I think lots of people love frogs, but my whole childhood it was, you know, a thing in our family that Mum was really excited when we saw frogs, and we'd see them, you know, quite often. She's very worried about people picking up frogs with sunscreen on their hands and things, you know, she's very interested in protecting frogs. So I think that's going to be really good. I did run into a few little issues with this motif. So it's not exactly the same as the motif that shows up on the mittens. And the reason that it is not exactly the same is that I did lose at Yarn Chicken a little bit. I didn't have a ton of this quite dark brown, almost a black. I didn't have a ton of that left, and I kind of gambled and decided to just go for it and see if I could manage the whole motif. I got about halfway through when I realized that I was not going to be able to manage the whole motif. I was going to be a line or two short, and I was really discouraged. I was a bit frustrated because I quite like the high contrast of the three different colors, but you know, not the end of the world. The first thing I thought of was buying more of it. But there were two challenges to this. Namely, I was knitting this the night before my flight. So it would have been it just wouldn't have arrived in time in the UK, and I don't live in Canada anymore. I don't know where to buy Plodilopi in Canada. That would have been a nightmare in itself, and just a bit of a hassle. The second issue with that is because Mum bought this in Iceland directly, it didn't come with any labels. So I have no idea what this original color was. I did spend a bit of time online examining the kind of four colors that I thought it could be, and I think this might be the sheep black. Is that the name of the color that I thought it was? But I'm not sure. So you know, even if I had had time to order it, it might just not have shown up. I'm sorry if you can hear that. My mom is baking away in the kitchen, and actually my dad is installing a sink downstairs, so there's lots of family noise possibly today. But I think it's all you know, background happy busy noise. So hopefully that won't bother you too much. But yes, so I kind of established that I just couldn't buy more. Frustration. Okay, not the end of the world. I decided to pull it back. And because I am holding the Plodilopi double throughout the whole hat, which I probably should have said right at the beginning when I introduced this, but I forgot. Anyways, I held this double all the way through. So my initial idea to fix the issue of not having enough of this dark yarn was to pull back, and I had lots of this brown. So I thought that I could kind of marl those two together, hold one of the mid brown and one of the dark brown, and just have kind of marled frogs through the main motif. But very fortunately, before I started pulling it out, my partner came in with some good lateral thinking and suggested that I just cut some of the lines out of the frog motif. And it's just that kind of fresh perspective on a problem. I was staring at it so hard, I don't think that would have occurred to me. I was too close to the issue. So he helped me figure it. I ended up cutting 2 rows out of the motif, and I'm actually so happy with how it turned out. So my frogs are a little bit squatter than the original motif, but I think they're kind of adorable. And I think Mom's really gonna like it. I brought 2 hats with me on this trip, of kind of, you know, one very, very warm hat and one moderately warm hat, and they're both hats that I've knit in the last couple of months that you will have seen, the sheep hat and the green handspun hat that I made for myself, and they're both kind of prototypes of hats that I made for my parents. So I feel like I'm walking around with prototypes of their gifts and just hoping that they won't notice or, you know, ask too many questions. But my mom did kind of say, "Ooh, I really like that sheep hat. Ooh, maybe you could make me one of those," and she tried it on her head and stuff and really was enjoying it. So that was a kind of fun I have a secret moment that Mom doesn't know about yet, because of course she is getting one like that. And my mom isn't that crazy about sheep. She likes sheep because I like sheep, and, you know, because she likes all animals, but she really, really likes frogs. So I think this will be a really, really big hit. So this I'm really pleased with. I think this is probably one of my most successful gift knits. I think that's gonna be a fun one to watch her open on Christmas Day. I don't think I have much more to say about that, other than that's really fun. I realize that, you know, a hat with giant frogs on it might not be for everybody, but I think for Mom that's gonna be really fun, and I think it's really cute too. So, finished object number 2, a really fun one. So, just because I didn't feel like I had enough knitting on my plate, actually I feel like I've had so much knitting on my plate. We are a few days ahead of Christmas now, and all of the gift knitting is done. It is all finished, and it's all blocked, which feels, you know, I'm really on top of my game. I've got a couple days to go before I have to gift all of this. But I did slot in one kind of unexpected extra gift, and that is this one here in this really fun color. So the reason that I slotted this in at the last minute is that Mom and I are actually going to a bit of a kind of Christmas party, Christmas get-together this evening with a friend of hers, a kind of former colleague that's become a friend who's just been really, really good to her for a long time, and who's been really generous with me and really kind to me and my partner when we're in town. Just, you know, one of those really, really lovely family friends. And she's a really good gifter. I don't know if, you know, there's always a bit of pressure with the people in your life who are really good gifters. There's just a little bit of extra pressure that you want to give them a really good gift to show how much you appreciate how thoughtful they are and how much they really think about what you will appreciate and who you are, I guess, right? That's kind of, the most successful gifts kind of show that the person knows who we are, I think, right? So she's a very good gifter. And Mom was kind of stressing about what to get her and asking my advice, and we were thinking about various things. And kind of before I realized what I was saying, I suggested that we go to a yarn shop together, pick up some yarn, and that I would knit her hat. So that is what I did. I ended up, it's knit at worsted weight, so it was fine. It was, you know, it didn't take a lot of time to knit up and gift her, and it's a fun kind of collaborative gift between me and Mom because she chose the wool. And as you can see, it's very different from what I usually make for myself. But it was a lot of fun to knit with something so bright, actually. So this is knit with, I've got little bits left, 2 strands held together, a wool and a mohair. I have never knit with a mohair before. I realize that I am years and years behind that trend. We're not even a trend. People have been knitting with mohair for ages. I am years and years behind in not having used mohair yet, and it was interesting. I can definitely understand the appeal. It's incredibly soft. So this is knit with the kind of base yarn is Malabrigo Rios, and I know that this is a magenta color. Looking online, it seems like there are maybe 2 codes for magenta, and the yarn shop, we went to Espace Tricot, which is a yarn shop in kind of the west side of Montreal that I've mentioned a couple of times. So we went there, and they were kind enough to ball this up for me, because of course I actually didn't think that far ahead, but I don't have my Swift or ball winder here. So I would have just been doing it around my knees, which it's not the end of the world, but I am, I was knitting a lot. I didn't really want to spend the time doing that. This has kind of been, the last couple of weeks have been any time I'm sitting, I'm knitting. So that was really kind of them to offer to do that, and kind of reminded me that that would have been an issue before I even thought of it. But the reason that I'm giving you this rambly story about that is that my label for that yarn is inside. They put it into, quite common to keep it from collapsing, which is really, I love that. I do that with my own, but I don't have access to what actual color this is. So I will update that eventually, but I'm probably going to leave it in until I use the rest of this yarn. So it is a magenta. I don't really know much more than that, but it is really beautiful. This is a super wash wool, which is not something that I use for myself generally, but it is just incredibly soft. That it was really nice to knit with. One thing I will say is it really smells like vinegar. And I don't think that that's altogether unusual, especially for this kind of, I'm not sure if Malabrigo is hand-dyed, but it's certainly a hand-dyed effect. It very well could be hand-dyed, though they're a kind of larger company than most, I think. But so the vinegar obviously would have just been used to set the dye, but I have used Malabrigo Rios before many years ago and enjoyed working with it, and it definitely didn't smell. And I smelled some of the other ones in the store, and some of them didn't. So maybe it's because it's such a rich color that they had to use more vinegar or did extra vinegar baths. I don't love the smell of vinegar. I can, as part of some of my medical conditions, I have some heightened sensory issues, particularly around smell and light. And so that was a little bit of an issue for me. So what I did was I put it in a mesh bag and hung it out in the sun and the breeze for a little while, and that made a really big difference. I can still smell the vinegar, but I kind of have to press my nose into it now. So that, in case anyone else ever has that issue, I very much recommend sunlight. Sunlight just, cures a lot of evils. And then the mohair that I'm holding it with, aren't those gorgeous together? So that's the magenta. Beautiful. And the mohair that I'm holding it together with is Knitting for Olive, and that is the color Pink Daisies. And this is just so bright and so beautiful. I really love the kind of what's the name of that algorithm? There's a mathematical equation for, it's on the tip of my tongue. Anyways, I'm sure some of you are shouting it at me, but I love that it's kind of giving that seed cluster pattern as it gets down in the ball. So I held those two together. It was incredibly soft to work with, the two of these. As I said, I'm not usually a superwash and mohair kind of person, but this helped me to understand the appeal. I still don't think it's exactly what I'm generally looking for in my garments in particular, but this really helped me to understand the appeal. It's incredibly soft. So I also had a lot of fun just with seeing how the three of them compare, the kind of two balls separately and the way it knit up. Look at that. And Mum and I had a lot of fun picking those colors together. It was Mum's idea to use a mohair. She thought that would be right up the kind of recipient's alley. So we looked at Tin Can Knits has a whole web page where they just kind of show different examples of what pairing a mohair with a complementary yarn or a contrasting yarn looks like, and they had some examples of variegated and speckled yarns held with mohair, and Mum really liked that. So that was kind of where the idea to look for a more variegated yarn like the Malabrigo came from. And I'm really pleased with the result. I think that's gonna be just perfect for the giftee. So we'll be gifting that to her tonight. Part of why I wanted to film today, and hopefully that will make her feel like we really know and love her as well. So that is item number 3. I'm whipping through these. Okay, and finally I have 2 items left, and I'm going to talk about them together because they are both made out of alpaca that I've mentioned before. Alpaca that my mom, my brother, and I bought together in the early autumn and early September when I was visiting. We went to an alpaca farm in the Saint-Lazare region, not far from Montreal, and had a really good time, had lots of fun. And Mom and Graham both picked some yarn for themselves, but that I would, with the understanding that I would do the knitting. So I'll talk about my brother's hat first. And this is made out of a chunky gray alpaca. And this is so interesting. So this is worsted weight, and I held it double to match with the chunky. But it is natural dyed. The gentleman who owns the alpaca farm and runs it is not the person who did the natural dyeing. That was someone who isn't with the farm anymore, so he doesn't know what the natural dye was exactly. But look at how, I just can't believe how bright that is. It's just gorgeous. So that was the last skein of dyed yarn that they had, of naturally dyed yarn. Everything else was just the raw alpaca colors. And my brother really reached for it right away. He was very excited by that color. So I was quite excited to incorporate the 2 of those together. I was a little nervous about it, obviously he grabbed it not understanding that worsted weight and chunky weight yarn don't necessarily fit in a project super easily together, but holding the worsted weight yarn double worked really well. I just kind of self-drafted a hat, figured out what my gauge was, and went from there. I cast on 68 stitches for the ribbing and increased up to 72 or 74 stitches. 74 stitches for the top of the hat, and that has worked really well. It fits me very comfortably, and it fits my dad very comfortably, and my brother's head fits somewhere in the middle between my dad and I. So, I'm not exactly sure how big his head, but wherever he falls between dad and I, it will fit him comfortably, so I'm very pleased with that. I did the whole thing for this hat on 6.5 millimeter needles. I'm not sure that those were the most ideal needles, but I don't have anything bigger than that. So I was looking, and lots of chunky hat patterns call for bigger needles, like 8 millimeter needles even on the top of the hat. And I often have to size up needles, so going up to 8.5 or maybe even 9 millimeters. I don't love knitting with needles that are that big. Even the 6.5 millimeter needles I found a bit ungainly and a bit hard on my hands. But my concern was that it would be an overly dense fabric, and I don't think that's the case. I think instead it is a nice dense fabric that will be very appropriate for Montreal winters. It is quite cold out today. My partner and I often take different flights to arrive in Canada and then leave together, just because I can be away from the UK for longer because of work. He often, stays a little bit longer and meets me later. So he's joining us today, and it is going to be the coldest day of the year so far. I think it's going to be a high of minus 15 degrees Celsius. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit off the top of my head, but I will put it up in the air. It's pretty chilly. It's going to be brisk. It's going to be brisk. So we've got some warm stuff waiting for him as well, but I'm kind of pleased that there's some good cold weather, because my brother is immune to the cold, which is one of the deep frustrations of my life. I'm always feeling the cold, and he's so tough. He really doesn't feel it. But even he, at minus 15, going down to minus 18, I think it might be getting even colder later this week, even he will wear a good warm hat for that. So I think the timing's working out really well, and as we go for walks on Christmas Day and stuff like that, I suspect that this will get worn. So really, really pleased with that. Such a fast knit. This really saved my butt in terms of timing, because it just knit together so quickly. Alright, so 5th, I'm a bit confused because I don't have the scarf. The Simple Thing scarf is not with me, so I'm a bit confused between 4 and 5 items. The 4th item that I have in person, but the 5th item that I have to talk to you about today is this Rebea scarf. And I know that with the Sophie scarf and the Sophie shawl, there was such a, it's interesting the way Instagram changes the way that we interact with even what patterns we like and what patterns become popular. I think, you know, part of, I'm a really big fan of the look of that pattern. I think they're lovely. It's very similar, like, you know, such a useful, I like that pattern on its own, but I think some of the popularity came from being able to wrap it up like a croissant. And the Rebea scarf is similarly sweet, I think, in that the designer, who is Chris Berlin, showed how you can wrap it up as a rose, and I think that that's just beautiful, actually. So I think that is probably how I'm going to wrap it up to gift it to Mom. Maybe I'll even put a ribbon around it so it stays like that. But I think that that's just beautiful. So, as you will be able to tell if you joined me last time, this is not a Simple Thing shawl. I had initially cast on this as a Simple Thing shawl as well, and was going to go ahead with that. When I decided to knit the other Simple Thing shawl, I realized that I was going to get bored, because they're both quite simple patterns. This is quite a simple pattern as well, the Rebea scarf, but it's new to me. It's the first time I knit it, so there was just a little bit of a learning curve, just a bit of an adjustment, just a bit of thinking as I figured out how many stitches to cast, to increase to, and things like that. There was a little bit of decision making there, which I'll chat about. So that is why I decided to go with this different pattern, the Rebea scarf, and I chose the Rebea scarf. I was feeling a little bit like maybe that was a silly reason to change patterns, but at the same time I was a bit time pressured, and I knew that if it was a more interesting pattern for me, I would get it done faster. I would be drawn to it, and I would, you know, knit more and knit more often. So I think that was sound reasoning for changing the pattern I was working on. But I was still a little bit indecisive, and I wanted to make sure that I found an alternative pattern that was equally, that would suit my mother equally. So I actually found the pattern for this from a video by Knitted by Whitney. She's an absolutely just delightful knitter based in Nova Scotia. I lived in Nova Scotia for a year. I'm not sure if I've ever shared that before, and I just, Nova Scotia has a real place in my heart. I loved the year that I spent there, and I found her videos initially because I was searching for knitting traditions in Nova Scotia and that kind of thing. And she's just got such a positive energy. I'm a really big fan of her videos. Anyways, so she had a video which I will link about, she's done two of them, and I can't remember which one it was in, but she's done two videos that are kind of alternative small scarves that are not the Sophie shawl. And this was in one of them, and I looked at it and I thought about my mom. And I felt very, very justified in this. I feel like my partner makes little appearances in this vlog just in terms of very solid advice that he gives me sometimes. And I bought the pattern. It's a paid for pattern, and I bought the pattern and started casting it on, and he was off doing something else, and he walked through where I was sitting to make a cup of tea and looked at it and said, oh, there we go. Mom just peeking out, and I didn't want to be talking about her pattern while she's there. I think it's all right. Anyways, he was walking through where I was knitting, and he looked at the screen and he said, oh, is that for your mom? That looks like your mom. That pattern looks like your mom. And I felt like, yes, that's exactly what I want. So that is what I cast on for her. I will unravel it now. I'm having fun with that looking like a rose. I think that's quite pretty. So it's quite long. I made a few changes to this pattern, not significant changes, but I do have one tiny gripe. I loved the pattern. I found it really easy to follow. I think it's a really clever, kind of deceptively simple pattern. But my one gripe, and more with the way that the pattern is listed on Ravelry than the pattern itself, but on Ravelry it's listed as a fingering weight scarf, as a scarf that calls for fingering weight yarn, when in actuality Chris Berlin, who wrote the pattern, has 4 different samples, and 2 of the samples use a fingering weight yarn held together with a mohair, so kind of 2 fingerings held together, or a fingering and a clumpy lace, or 2 of the other samples are knit with just straight DK yarns. So it isn't actually made for a fingering weight. That's not the end of the world, but it did just mean that I was expecting to just be able to follow the instructions and not think at all, and that's not quite what ended up happening. So to resolve that, you kind of start at one end and you increase to a certain stitch count. I increased quite a bit farther. I had quite a few more stitches on by the time I stopped decreasing than the pattern called for, just to achieve the kind of roughly the same width, because I thought that the width that she had was good. So that's what I did with that. And then the only other change that I made is, because this was precious alpaca that we bought, we met the alpacas, I really wanted to use up as much of the yarn as possible. So I used kitchen scales to figure out what kind of 50% would be, and save myself just 1 or 2 grams as a kind of conservative, just to kind of hedge my bets. But otherwise I did go kind of as long as the yarn would take me, and so it has ended up a bit longer than the pattern calls for. But that's good, it'll be able to go around her neck twice with a little knot. My mom really wants this as, in the same way that I use little scarves, she's really keen to have something tight, comfy, tight against her neck, tuck it into sweaters even, and then have a bigger scarf on top for when it's really cold. So I think that that will serve that purpose really, really nicely. And I'm really pleased with it. My mom and I have quite different taste in a lot of clothes and jewelry and things. We also have a very different color palette. I tend to not be drawn towards autumnal colors. I think they look so beautiful on other people, but I don't. I feel like they just wash me out. I don't love the way that I look in them. I wear a lot of cool tones, and Mom looks so good in beautiful browns and oranges, and so it's fun for me to be able to knit with those colors that I really enjoy, even if I'm not going to use them for myself. So that's really fun. And I did just want to talk a little bit about saving it to the end. So if you're not interested in chat about the alpaca farm, then of course, you should stop listening at any time to anyone if it's not your bag. But I just had a really fun time at the alpaca farm. I had never done that kind of thing before. I've seen lots of sheep. I've visited farms that have sheep, but never alpacas before. And it was a farm with several alpacas and 1 llama who kind of stood in the middle. But it was quite informal in a way that I wasn't expecting. And I don't know if you have any other experiences of visiting alpaca farms, if it was different. I'd be really curious to know, because it was he was a really gregarious, lovely, chatty man, Quebecois, so I got to practice my French, which I was really pleased with, because I'm conscious that my French is getting rustier and rustier the less I use it living in the UK. So that was good fun, got to practice, though he was very comfortable in English as well and happy to speak English. But it was fun for me to practice my French with this, really lovely guy. And he kind of set us all up. It was the 3 of us, and there was another couple with their young daughter, so just a really small group of us. He set us up with little buckets of carrot slices, and then we got dry food later, and he just kind of led us out into the kind of fenced-in area for the female alpacas. The male alpacas were off in a separate area. They were fenced in just because they can occasionally be a little bit aggressive, but we did go and feed them through the fence a bit so they didn't feel too left out. But we just went in with the female alpacas, and he was talking about how kind of gentle and docile they are and playful, and so it was really interesting to go in. He encouraged us to pet their necks if we could. They didn't seem to love it. They didn't seem to love being touched, but they were really gentle and very food motivated. They were really going for that food, and not the most elegant creatures in the whole world, but gentle and really, really funny and sweet. So that was really, really enjoyable. I had planned to take some video footage, but my hands got so messy, and I was covered in alpaca food and alpaca slobber, and I was just having fun, so I just kind of didn't worry about it. I took some pictures of my mom and my brother, but my mom took a little accidental video. I think she meant to take a picture. It's a very short video, but she took a little video of me really talking to one of the alpacas. So I'll share that with you here. But it was really one of my favorite things about visiting the alpaca farm, beyond the alpacas themselves, was getting to chat with this gentleman who, it just seems like he's a really neat guy. He's had a lot of different careers in the past, but it sounds like he's often had animals alongside. And the alpacas, they started, 10 or 15 years ago, and he's just really enjoyed it. They used to send the fiber, he was saying, to a mill in Quebec, in the same province that we're in, but it just didn't work out exactly. There was, it sounds like it's quite a process to find a mill that fits what you want and that is able to process your fiber. He said that he was losing a lot more of the weight of fiber when he worked with that mill, and it sounds like they didn't really have the capacity to help him anyway. So now he uses a mill in New Brunswick, I have my suspicions because of the way that the balls were tied. I have my suspicions about which mill in New Brunswick it might be. I think I might know it. But anyways, the conversation was moving quickly and I didn't really get a chance to ask him. So that's just me having a suspicion. I don't know for sure. But the fiber gets sent off to a mill in New Brunswick and it's all just their own fiber. So, and it was quite fun to see it wound up in different weights. So this for Mom was a fingering weight. For my brother, obviously, it was a worsted weight and a chunky, and 3 different colors already. And I bought one for myself, a sport weight yarn in a dark gray. And I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with that yet. Probably make another small scarf, because the alpaca is so soft and so nice to have against your skin. So that's probably the plan. But I wanted to share a little bit the experience of visiting the alpaca farm, because it was really positive. And I think one of my favorite parts was the way that, you see me talking to that alpaca, the way that the owner talked to the alpacas too. You could tell that he really loved them and that they loved him in their own kind of funny way. Not overly expressive with affection, but just you could tell that they were really, really comfortable with him. And when we moved from carrots to using dry food, he kind of opened up this bin of dry food, gave us each a bit, and then rather than cover the bucket over again, because he said, we could go back and get more, he kind of moved a bit of fencing to block it. And a couple of the alpacas, kind of when we all had our backs turned, a couple of the alpacas and the llama kind of teamed up to knock down the fence and get at the food. And one of the leading troublemaker alpacas was an alpaca named Sabrina, and he kind of turned around, "Oh, Sabrina, you should be doing that, Sabrina." And it was just really fun to see this man talking to his alpacas, scolding his alpaca in the same way that my family, for example, have always scolded our dogs, when they get into something they shouldn't. Kind of frustrated with them, but also with a lot of humor and a lot of self-awareness, and just kind of, an animal that you really love and care about. So that was really positive, and I think, we all want the fibers that we use, if we're using animal fibers, to be coming from the animals in the most positive, kind of most symbiotic way possible. And not that that's always, exactly the way it happens, or that that's entirely possible. And I know that some people have feelings about the fact that we've reared sheep and designed sheep breeds specifically to get softer wool. I know that some people have feelings about that. I have feelings about that too, if I'm honest, but I think if the animals are treated well, then I can feel all right with that. And seeing these alpacas and the way that they were treated, and the way that they clearly had affection for him back, really did kind of impact the way that I felt about these fibers, and the way that I felt knitting these, and the way I feel gifting them to family members. So that was, it was just really, really positive, and gave me time and an opportunity, I think, to think about some of those processes and be reminded that these really do come from animals. I think that that's part of the reason that I really like rustic wools, if I'm honest. I love finding a bit of twig or some vegetable matter in yarn. Obviously not too much, because I do pick it out, but I think I love those little reminders that these were animals, that these, this fiber, the wool, the alpaca hair comes from a living, breathing animal that is still out there causing trouble and getting into food that they shouldn't. So I just wanted to share that a little bit and put that in perspective, and maybe ask if you have similar experiences, or encourage you to go and visit farms if you can. I haven't done any of that in the UK at all, and I don't know if it's as prevalent or if there are any opportunities close to where I'm living right now, but I'm definitely going to look into it. I know that a few of you have mentioned that you were from the Northeast. If you were from the Northeast and you know of any good farms, please do let me know, because I'm keen. So I think that those are all of the items that I wanted to chat to you about. The 4 items. Keep the browns away from each other so they look more distinct. I'm really excited to gift these, and have been really having a fun time sharing them with you, so thank you for joining me. The final thing, I guess, that I wanted to mention today is that this will probably be my final video, or just about. I might post a little tiny thing later, but I think it'll be just about the final video that I do for this year. So I wanted to wish you a really happy holiday season if you're celebrating, but you know, a really, really happy end of 2024 to everyone. I hope that the end of the year is treating you well, and if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, that the longer days are treating you well. By the time I post this, we will be on the other side of the 21st, I think. It's the 21st today. It is the 21st today, so there's no way I'm uploading this today. So by the time you see it, the days will be getting longer if we're in the Northern Hemisphere, which will be really nice. And I hope you get some daylight and some good crafting time. It's been just about exactly a year since I filmed my first episode and posted it on YouTube, and I don't know if I know what I was expecting when I did that. I kind of knew that I needed something and was excited about the knitting and was watching all of these podcasts and, you know, knitting YouTube channels that I was enjoying so much, and kind of just wanted to get involved and put myself out there a little bit. But I don't really know what I was expecting to happen, and it's been really, really positive for me this year to be expanding my life in this way and feeling like I'm making connections in this way in a year when some other things are being closed off to me because of my health. And, you know, in some ways it feels like my life has gotten a bit smaller because of my health, and this has been a big step outward. So I really wanted to kind of touch on how thankful I am for that, and how thankful I am that you've joined me, and, you know, like that is because of you. It's been this big step outward because you've joined me and watched and shared some of your lovely stories and your experiences with knitting and health and all the things that go into life. So I did really want to touch on that and say a sincere thank you, because it's been really good for me, and I hope good for you as well. So I will leave you there and try not to ramble too much. I'm never good at endings. I just ramble, don't I? I'm the same on the phone, I have to admit. Like, I don't like saying goodbye to people. I'm never good at it. But I will leave you without rambling too much, with lots of really happy wishes for the end of the year. I hope you get lots of crafting in and some time with people you love, whether that be family or friends, or, you know, even people who love you and who you love that you've met through the internet. So thank you so much, as always, and I will see you next time.